Okay, welcome to this site. We're in a semi-rural area outside of Victoria, and it's a south-facing slope. And we installed this garden in 2013. The goal of this site was to create a multi-storied kind of food forest or edible landscape. And before, when we first got here, all of this was perennial grasses and weeds. So this is one of our first projects with Hatchet and Seed. And so when we arrived on site, it was in the summertime, and the grass was pretty tall. We could see that there was a little bit of bedrock, and the site is quite sloped. And so the first thing we did was test out what kind of soil we had, and right off the bat we saw that it was pretty straight clay soil. And so we decided to bring in some animals to help us with clearing the land instead of bringing in a machine. So our friends have a farm just down the way, and at the time they had some Clydesdale horses, which we brought on site, 2 horses, and they lived here for about a month, eating the grass and leaving us a big pile of manure. And that was really fun, really great for the client, really great for the neighbors to see these giant horses in their backyard. And so one of the design kind of criteria, or one of the things that we were aiming for, was to create a bit of an edible hedgerow. This area where we are in North Saanich, it is really known for its hedgerows around here. It's got beautiful mix of native and introduced species hedgerow around here, and so that was something that we wanted to kind of reflect in the garden by making kind of tight spacing and planting lots of different species as well. And so we have some different pockets of guilds going on. So a guild is a group of plants that are growing together that help support each other. So we would have a main tree species like a pear or an apple or a plum, and then we would have supporting species in there, a nitrogen fixer, some pollinator plants grown right around them to help support that tree. And so this is what we have growing here. And I would say out of all of our sites, this is the one where we have distinct guilds growing. And we've learned so much over the years of this site. It's been 7 years now since we planted the trees, and we've had many years, I would say 3 to 4 years of getting harvests now off of the trees as well. So lots of fruit are being produced. Last year they had hundreds of pounds of apples. This year lots of pears and figs, mulberries, and we have some other kind of shrubby species that we'll show you as well. Okay, so after we had the Clydesdales in here, then we could see the site, we could see what we were looking for. And it's, as I said, it's very clay soil here. And so we decided to put in a top swale, which is on a bit of a slope that goes towards a pond. And the pond was excavated out, and we created a rock wall berm. And then going down the slope is where we have our hedgerow, edible hedgerow as well. So in these beds here, we created something called a boomerang swale, which is basically a boomerang-shaped bed with dugout pathways, and then we planted on the mounds. So the beds are mounded up, the pathways were dug out. And what happens is when the whole site in the wintertime is primed, when everything is saturated with water and it's raining, you can actually see the water coming down the swale into the pond, and the overflow flows down these boomerang swales and waters the site. This is a way of moving water across the landscape and storing it as it goes along. And as you can see, the plants here are really thriving. Everything has put on lots of growth. We still have irrigation here, a really good irrigation system, so we can get through the drought. But everything is, loaded with food, and really likes, what we've done here. So here I am standing between 2 guilds. On my right, this is a Italian prune plum, and over here we have a pear. And so basically what we've done is planted the trees on these mounds and then planted other support species around them. And so in this case, some of the support species are big shrubs that are nitrogen fixing. So as the year goes on and we prune these trees, we're feeding the soil. This one here is a seabuckthorn, and it has lots of fruit on it right now. They're quite tart, really healthy, super good fruit. So we're going to talk a little bit about seabuckthorn in a bit more depth. It's a plant that we don't often plant. As I said before, this is one of our first installs, and so we're really gung-ho to plant all of the permaculture plants that you see in the books. But every site and every climate is really different, so it's important that you know your local climate and how the plants are going to react. And seabuckthorn loves to spread. It has really strong roots that kind of go out laterally and send up suckers everywhere. So that's something to be aware of if you're going to be planting them. They only do that if they're in a place they love. Like if you have wood chip pathways and mulch around their roots, it's something that they can really push, through and grow everywhere. So part of our maintenance in this site has been to dig out those seabuckthorn roots and just focus on the one tree. And so that's working here. We're able to, find the suckers and pull them up. And the tree doesn't seem to be affected by it too much. Another thing about seabuckthorn, when you buy it or when you're reading in a book about it, it'll say you need 1 male for 7 females. That 1 male will pollinate 7 females. And from what we've noticed, it is variable. I've seen them fruiting or flowering at different times, so I'm not really sure that the male is actually doing anything. We had a male planted behind you here, and it's gone, and we're still getting fruit. So the male died back, and we dug it out around the path where it was suckering, and it's, doesn't seem to have an effect on this tree here. It's still fruiting. We have another seabuckthorn here. It doesn't seem as happy as this one, but it has fruit on it as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages of growing in a guild when you're growing a fruit tree. And so, often when you're talking about permaculture or food forestry, the guild is really held up as this amazing thing that you can do in your garden where you get all these different layers of food production and things like that. And it's true. You can plant one tree, plant things around it, and have things stacked over time so that you're getting, early perennial vegetable and then later food production on your fruit trees. So I don't want to dissuade you from experimenting with that. But something to keep in mind is time and space. And so basically, as your main tree grows, it's filling up space, it's creating shade around the bottom, and then all of a sudden you could have hundreds and hundreds of pounds of food on the tree that you need to be able to access. And something that we've noticed over, the years of planting food foresty type places is that spacing is really something to keep in mind initially, or to be able to edit out over time. If your fruit tree is getting really big and those support species underneath are starting to get crowded, you can always move them. You can move them out into more of the drip line. You can move them to other places. You can divide them and sell them or give them away. And so this is something here where we've planted, like on this side, this is a goumi, an Elaeagnus multiflora, and it's a beautiful tree. We love these plants. They do get huge though. Just in as a little aside, little story, once we were in Nelson and someone was selling goumi berries at the farmer's market. And so we were chatting with him because we'd never seen it sold commercially before. And he said that his goumi plant was 20 feet wide, one plant. And so that's something to keep in mind over time, that some of your support species might get bigger than your main tree. And so, you know, with these nitrogen fixers, cutting them back is part of the maintenance. Cutting them back helps to build that nitrogen soil. And so every year you want to be pruning back. You know, you can even coppice them and they will send up these kind of straight whips. You can see the different color, more reddish color. So this is last year's growth. This is also what you would do, what you would use if you were taking cutting wood. So this winter we can cut this back and propagate from it. So the plant is really resilient. It will regenerate quite quickly as you prune it back, but it's important that you do it because otherwise it's going to take over the slower growing fruit tree. So if you are wanting to grow in a guild, if you have a small space, you know, if you're urban or you have a small space garden and you want to grow a guild because you want to have food more year round than, you know, just the fruit tree, I would recommend thinking about plants that you can grow underneath that aren't going to impede on the space like we just mentioned, but also that aren't things that you actually need to dig up. So that's another kind of consideration when you're planting around your fruit tree. If you're wanting to grow something where you're harvesting the roots, it's important that you take care that you're not totally disturbing the roots of the trees. And so in this situation, we have these amazing cardoon plants. So these plants you don't need to dig up for the root. This is cardoon, which is similar to artichoke. And instead of having a really big globe head on the flower stalk, it has a smaller head. These get quite tall. They go way up through the canopy here. And then they'll flower and the bees just love them. But what I want to tell you about cardoon is that in the fall, right now in October is the time when you wrap the bottom stalks. And so you put cardboard and tape it around and leave that on there for about a month, and that blanches out the stalk. And then after that, after the month has passed, you take the cardboard off and cut it at the base, and then you can eat this bottom part. So no digging involved. The plant can live. These leaves are excellent mulch leaves. So something that you can do around in your guild is plant things that have lots of good biomass, like these beautiful leaves or comfrey leaves, and then you use that as chop and drop. So basically you chop back the leaves and mulch the plant. Here we are in the upper swale, and so this is the dugout trench. It's on a bit of an angle that heads towards the pond behind me here. And on both sides we bermed up and planted fruit and nuts. So we have apples here and here. This one's a mutsu apple, also called crispin. It has huge apples on it. And we also have hazelnuts. And these things have really grown. We prepped the soil in 2013, but we planted in 2014. And so that's only 6 years ago. And you can see the growth. There was nothing here before. And now all of these trees are really filling in this space. So we live in gray squirrel territory. Something to keep in mind if you're wanting to grow nuts. The client here doesn't really get any hazelnuts. The squirrels get them all. And so if we wanted to stop the squirrels, we would have to either net really well. They can still get in the netting. We've seen this in the past. They chew right through and get in there. Or you trap. And I'm not really sure how effective that is. But it's really great to have hazelwood, hazelnut trees in your yard or in your garden because of their amazing wood. You can make baskets, you can make stakes and trellising, you can make spoons, and there's lots of things that you can do with hazelwood. So I'm not gonna try to convince you not to plant nuts, especially hazels. Okay, so this is a beautiful tree. It's a mulberry, and that we got from Bob Duncan. All of these trees actually came from Fruit Trees and More. And so this was sold to us as a black mulberry. I'm not really sure what specific variety it is. And it took several years to grow. It just sat there for the first couple of years. It didn't do anything. And we thought, oh my gosh, is it not gonna grow? And now look at it, it's huge. And this is after some big time summer pruning. It was just sprawling over the fence and had loads of fruit on here. And one thing to know about mulberry is it actually has an edible leaf. So in the early spring, when the leaves are really fresh and waxy, you can eat the leaves or feed them to your goats. And so it's a bit of a multi-purpose tree. And when the temperatures cool down a bit, it will have beautiful yellow leaves on it. So it does have really nice fall interest. And then, yeah, just to know over time, you really want to, prune back and let some of the suckers come up, because it'll fruit on 1 year wood. Okay, so just a little note on propagation and buying mulberries at the nursery versus propagating your own. So mulberries they can get really, really big. And so this one has a rootstock on there that has been grafted. And so it will have a determined size. It's really easy to take mulberry cuttings. You actually want to, the best strike rate, or when it will take really good, is in the summertime, is when you take the cuttings. And so it will take, and you'll get a big black mulberry tree, but it might be really, really big. And so that's something to keep in mind if you're wanting to do your own propagation, is to maybe find some mulberry rootstock that you can graft onto. One more thing to know about black mulberries is that they stain quite a bit. So they, when you pick them, your hands will go red, your mouth will be all red, but also if you had a patio or a driveway underneath, it's something to be aware of. You wouldn't really want to plant a black mulberry on some really nice hardscaping. So here's another support species. As you can see, it's very large. So this is autumn olive. It's also in the Elaeagnus family. It has the silver leaf on the back. And it's not an olive. A lot of people get confused by that. It has a few different names. I've heard it called autumn berry, lycoberry, because it has a lot of lycopene in it. And a great thing about this is it's a fall berry. So here we are, October 28th, and it's loaded. And we've even had a few frosts, and that makes the berries even sweeter. So one shrub can have many, many pounds of berries on them. And they're really good for fresh eating. We freeze them and eat them in porridge and things like that. It doesn't take long to fill a bucket with the fruit. Our daughter loves these. She'll just gorge on these. So really awesome plant to have. And like I said, it's nitrogen fixing. So this is a good one to be cutting back and using these little shoots for mulch. And just to be aware that you don't want to overtake your main species in the guild. In this case, we prune twice a year.